All right, good evening, everyone. This is the meeting of the Solar and Battery Storage Moratoria Study Committee, January 11th, 2023. This is being broadcast by Area 58 TV, Channel 15 on your cable station. I will start off tonight on the agenda. The first thing is concerns expressed from the committee members about the solar and battery storage. And we had a list of concerns. And we can just start at the top. And the first one on the list of concerns was what is a direct abutter? And if you look, see, that was 3580.25.1. And
so if I may, Mr. Chair, I've got the
yes,
version of the bylaw on the screen. And I did a little
okay.
dabbling in a definition of direct abutter.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, is there any way you can blow that up a little tiny bit?
Thank you.
I'll bet we can.
Thank you, Sarah.
Some of us are practically blind.
Yeah, I can see it really good because it's right in front of me. I can't see what's behind me either.
Just maybe larger font or something.
I think if you go down to the lower right-hand side,
Thank
there's
you.
a sliding scale there.
Yeah, I'm doing old school. I started on computers when they had DOS
There
There you
commands.
go. Ah,
All right, we'll start with that. So what I did is I went in and looked at the state legislation about notice to abutters, and there are three sorts of abutters. There are abutters, there are abutters to abutters, and there are other parties of interest. So using those as a basis, the definition that I proposed for direct abutters is a direct abutter is a property owner as shown on the most recent applicable tax list that is adjacent to the property or properties seeking a permit. Because when we look at who gets notification for a special permit, it's the people who are right next door, the people who are within 300 feet, and the people who live adjacent across the street. So based on those and looking what a direct abutter is, it's eventually your next door neighbor, for lack of technical. So, but I used this, for the most part, the state language, just to avoid any sort of confusion as best possible. And I don't know if that helps, because I think the issue was when someone agrees to a reduced setback,
Yes.
who's that person?
Yes. And I think that's what has to be changed. I mean, to me, a direct abutter is a person that shares a property line with the project. That wasn't the question. The problem was whether a person who's considered a direct abutter should sign a waiver if they're 200 feet or more away from a project. And although there was a court case, because this did go to court over a certain solar project here we had in Carver, and so I don't think it's so much who's a direct abutter, but I think that we have to have something in the bylaws to define who has to sign a waiver for the 50-foot reduction, whether it be people that are 200 feet away or whether it's people that only the 50-foot setback is who they are affected.
Mr. Chair, am I correct in understanding the bylaw that if one abutter is 200 feet, and the next abutter, for whatever reason, is only 50 feet, all of the abutters have to sign, or that's the way the law was interpreted at one time, that all the abutters had to sign, or there was no reduction in setback. Isn't that what the issue was? And then
Yes, well, the issue was, I think, in some of the earlier projects we had done that had come to the planning board, the people that were more than 200 feet away from the project never signed
correct.
the waiver. But when it came to a new planning board, the newer members interpreted differently. And I can understand that because it really doesn't
It's
say
vague.
exactly what it is. There's a little, gray area there. So, although we had done, I think, several projects, and not everybody signed a waiver, the newer planning board decided that they wanted to have everybody sign a waiver, whether they were 200 feet away or what. So that's how this became a question.
But at some point, didn't it go to court and it was
Yes.
decided that not everybody had to sign, only the people who were less than 200 feet?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, I don't have that decision with me, but I believe that's the way it went. You're on the planning board now, John?
Nobody's told us that they,
Oh, so is this still in court then?
I
Should
don't-
we not be talking
I'm
about
actually
this,
not- I'm actually not familiar with this case.
we've had a couple of issues. Well, there was one case, that that the planning board was directed to, approve, because I recall now, the one case that the planning board was directed to approve because of, there was a discussion with regards to, with regards to the setbacks and 200 feet, and we were requiring that all abutters, all direct abutters, in accordance with the law, had to at least sign the waiver form. Whether they were within 200 feet or not, they
Right.
weren't giving up theirs, and they could say, the developer refused to go for refused to go back and get a couple of people that were outside. So our bylaws currently give the planning board leeway outside of, I believe it's 600 feet. If the person is greater than 600 feet, then we can say, nope, we don't need anything from them. But if they're inside that, the way it's written now, all direct abutters have to sign a waiver saying that they understand where the 50 feet is going to be, or where the setback is going to be reduced.
So can I ask what the relationship between a direct abutter and 200 feet is?
Well, the thing is, all these people were direct abutters, in my opinion. But it was the question of whether people that were 200 feet or more away from the solar project had to sign a waiver saying that they would allow the company to have their solar project within 50 feet of their property.
So 200 feet from the actual arrays, or 200 feet from the property line?
The arrays have to be 200 feet from the property line.
That's the setback?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
the abutters, the direct abutters, that's why I'm just kind of confused about what a direct abutter within 200 feet would be. Because, as I pointed out, there's direct abutters, the people who are right next door, adjacent to your property.
Right.
And then under the statute, when we give notice to parties of interest, it's people within 300 foot of that property line. So that's where I'm a little confused on a direct abutter within 200 feet. They don't seem to be
Well, it's that the project is 200 feet from their if the project is 200 feet or more from their property line, saying that this is the solar project, that's the property line, and that's, well, how can I say, this is my lot, my property line's here, and the solar project is 200 feet or more away from my property line. The question was, being a direct abutter, should I sign a waiver if other people are allowing a 50-foot setback from their property line, but I'm not allowing that, whether I would have to sign that waiver or not? And what happened in the past with earlier planning boards, we didn't require the people that were more, if their property line was 200 feet or more away from their property line, if the solar project was 200 feet or more away from their property line, we didn't require those people to sign a reduction.
But may I just interject? So I'm very confused here. This doesn't make a lot of sense, because if the waiver is saying, yes, you're okay to have your project within 50 feet of my property line, right?
Right.
So it doesn't matter if their house is 200 feet away. The waiver is saying it's okay to bring the project 50 feet to my property line, right?
No, it's not from the house, it's from the property
Okay,
line.
oh, from the property line.
Yeah.
So, okay, so they're
Yeah.
200 feet away, and you didn't require them to sign.
Right.
So now the project could be 50 feet from their property.
No. The question came up on Meadow Street, I believe. There was a project, and there was 4 or 5 abutters to that property.
Okay.
On one side of the project, the people allowed the solar company to move their project within 50 feet of their property line, of the shared property line. On the other side of the property, the solar panels were 200 feet from
the line.
from the property line of these neighbors on the other side.
Okay.
So the question came up, should only the people on this side of the property that are allowing the 50-foot reduction sign the waiver?
Okay.
Or should all the people sign a waiver? It didn't make any sense to me that people that the project was 200 feet from their property line would have to sign a waiver, although you could interpret it as that through our bylaw.
I thought the
Because it
waiver
says all
was
direct
to
abutters.
allow it to be 50 feet from the property
Yes,
line.
that's why I didn't think it really made any sense for people, if the project was 200 feet from their property line
No,
or
but if they sign a
more.
waiver, then it's going to be 50 feet from their property line.
Well,
right?
it is confusing, because if I was in a butter and the project was more than 200 feet from my property line, I wouldn't want to sign a waiver saying that
Yeah.
so it was
Yeah, I'm with
was
you.
confusing to everyone.
It sounds kind of like I'm on the other side of the property. This thing is 400 feet from me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why would I sign a waiver that says it's okay for 50 feet somewhere else? Because I would
Right.
feel like, am
right.
I implying that I'm okay with it being 50 feet
Right.
from my
Exactly.
property?
That's why
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
That's why it needs to be clarified,
Yeah.
that's all.
Yeah.
I don't know how the court interpreted this. I thought the courts had already come to the conclusion that only the people that
Were
were
affected.
allowing
Were
the
affected.
50-foot setback from their property line were the only people that would have to
So this
sign
is
the
particular
waiver.
to Meadows Street where this
It was
appeal
on
was?
Meadow Street, it
I think this was
was,
the one that we had to do over at the police station, where we had to,
Can we hear what you're saying?
This is, I think the one that's being referred to is the one that we had to, vote in over at the police station, when we had a meeting over at the police station.
Yeah, that was,
And we,
that was,
I think that was the,
that was Patriot Pines.
Can I,
no,
I actually have the exact wording here. of what the problem is. It says to allow setbacks a minimum of 12.5 feet of a raise or abutting a bog or other agricultural use as defined. Setbacks and screening requirements are waived in writing by all direct abutters in a residential agricultural, and it's that all. So every abutter that the project touches now has to give a waiver, and that's on page 64.
What's the section number?
It is, hold on, 3580.50, 3580.70.
Thanks.
So that's down in the dual use section.
Bruce, can I talk?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm not on the planning board now, so John may have to jump in with some, but I was on the planning board when this was created, and I've mentioned a little bit in the past, but to give like an overall picture of things. So we were on the board and there was a project before us, 72 Center Street. And the project was set down, and then the abutters were above, up on Harvest View Way. And the abutters could see down into where the array was going to go. And there was no way for the project to put in landscaping on its own property to screen the abutters on Harvest View. So in order to meet the screening requirement, the screening would have to go onto the properties on Harvest View Way. But the solar people couldn't mandate, and we couldn't say, you have to put the screening on their property. You can't do that. So the planning board at the time had the idea, man, what could be done to have this happen? And it came from, well, what if we could allow the screening to go on the abutters' properties? If they all signed off and said, we will allow the screening to go on our property and then the project can go as proposed, then we're okay with it. And it had to be everybody that the project touched. So when the planning board talked about this part of the bylaw, and I remember Amy Questle being there too, and we talked about what all abutters meant and everything, and then the way it was presented at town meeting too, was that here's the solar array, okay? So the setback is 200 feet from the property line. So if an array wanted to expand anywhere that would be less than 200 feet to someone's property, all of the abutters all the way around the array had to sign a waiver saying it's okay. And again, the intent behind that was because to achieve 100% screening on the properties that couldn't be screened from the bog property. Does that make sense so far?
Yep.
So that was the intention. It was to fulfill the 100% screening requirement. It wasn't to get bogs or to get arrays to be larger. It was really just to meet the screening requirement. So that's how it was presented at town meeting. Every single person had to sign off. That was the intent when it was written, approved by the board, approved at town meeting. Then, and when I was on the board too, and there were projects before us, that's how it was dealt with. After I left the board, and this is where John, you may have to correct me, but I kind of followed things. I guess there were a couple projects that went before the planning board where they allowed arrays to expand without everyone signing off. So like the people over here said, yeah, you can expand the array to closer to my house than 200 feet, but these people over here didn't. So then the planning board allowed it to go on this side, but the people who didn't sign the waiver, it stayed bigger. So that's where the problem started, was the way that the bylaw was originally intended to be used was now being applied differently. From all abutters to, okay, I sign off, so I will extend it. Then from what I followed, a couple projects were approved that way. Then the project on Meadow Street, the screening or the setbacks were denied because not everybody signed off. The board said, no, we're going to apply it as as originally written and intended, where every single person had to sign off. And I remember getting the court decision, and I believe the court referenced saying you have to allow this Meadow Street project to have the reduced setbacks on this side because you let other projects do it. So had the bylaw consistently been applied as written, where everyone always had to sign off, I think things would be different. But because a couple projects were allowed to have it extended in certain places, the court said, well, you let them do it, so now you have to let everybody do it. But the wording of the bylaw hasn't changed, and the intent was it. And this was one of the reasons that I even brought the idea of the moratorium to the board and then to town meeting to fix this ambiguity so it is always applied properly. And in thinking about this clause of the bylaw, I would like to see it scrapped altogether, that it just be a consistent 200-foot setback. So there's no who has to sign it, who doesn't. Because in my mind too, it's kind of, I'm having a hard time accepting it ethically, because while I've never been a direct abutter to a project that's been approached with a waiver, I get the feeling that it's kind of a pay your way around the bylaw, and that abutters are being approached and said, you know, if you allow us to reduce the setback, we'll give you X amount of dollars. And again, I haven't been party to this, but it just gives me the feeling like, well, maybe I'm not as good a negotiator as my neighbor, and I could have gotten more and stuff, and this is all speculation. But because it's not guaranteed that the reductions in setbacks is because of a screening issue, as originally intended, I think this part of the bylaw should just be scrapped, and it should just go back to 200 feet everywhere. No reductions and exemptions if this person signs off, because then it makes me think like everything in the bylaw, like the whole zoning bylaws. Oh, if you get permission from the neighbor, you can do whatever you want. And we'll just let neighbors give exceptions to everything. Because that's kind of what it feels like in this one. Here's the bylaw. If the neighbor says it's okay, go for it. And that's not the intent of the bylaw. So I would like to see it just go back to 200 feet everywhere. The ambiguity goes away. The kind of ethics and meaning and intention, you know, is good. So, but that's the backstory of kind of where it all came from and how it got to where it is. Am I incorrect in anything since I left the board?
No, I don't think so, no.
Okay,
So for clarity, the setback is 50 feet for solar. It's only 200 feet if it's in an RA zone, which is 80% of the town.
yeah,
So the vast majority that have been located in an RA zone are going to be 200 feet. But if it's solar's in an industrial district,
Sure.
then the setback's 50 feet. I just want to make clear that
sure.
200 feet is not the setback for everything, just in the RA zone. And to what extent does the board want, or does the town want to grant waivers for that reduced setback is sort of what we're talking about at this
Yeah.
point.
I mean, and there's different ways to do this. I mean, the board could grant a waiver even if it was a 200-foot setback. The reason this happened to us before we were working on the North Landfill solar, North Carver landfill solar, and there was a question about trying to add additional panels, and so then the question of whether we can reduce the setbacks or not. I remember talking to Savory more about this, or hearing him say something at town meeting. And Savory was on the board that did the solar bylaw, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, do you have anything to say? Or
Yes, I pulled the microphone closer to me.
I saw
just to
that
get ready.
creeping up. Yeah.
Yeah, there are two things I want to say here. I understand, Jen, what you're talking about, and that is probably based on the supposition that all the abutters are homeowners. When we had the solar bylaw committee back in Stephen Cole's day as the town planner, the waiver was put into place when abutters were possibly cranberry bogs or forested areas that would never be developed, in which case there was no view block needed. And it would allow the solar company to increase the amount of panels that they had on a property if they could get 50 feet away from a non-obtrusive abutting property. Which is why the waiver was put in place, so that if you did have a house on that same lot, you could say, no, I want my 200 feet here. I don't care about the other side where it's up against a forest, because that doesn't really affect me. It's too far away anyway, and it's not going to affect the abutter on that side because they're not looking at it. It's a non-buildable or unbuildable at the time lot. So that's why this waiver was put into effect in the first place. And this was sort of an aside as we did the solar bylaws with Mr. Cole. That solar bylaw committee was pretty much formed to deal with the dual use, because that was coming on board at the time. So we looked at all of the bylaws that were in effect, but this one had already been there, but we did add the waiver. The other thing I want to say on this, and it's something I think that maybe we can think about, is the language right now says that what is required is a waiver. Now, the very meaning of the word waiver means that you waive a right. So if you sign a waiver, you're waiving your rights to something. So perhaps the language should be that each abutting property owner needs to sign a document indicating whether or not they waive their right to reduce the 200 feet. Then it's not a waiver anymore, it's a document, and you have a yes or no answer there. And then each abutter has to sign a document. It's not a waiver, so they can't come back and say, well, you signed this waiver, now we can go 50 feet.
An acknowledgement.
It's an acknowledgement that, yes, I will allow 50 feet, or no, I won't. And then that clears that up so that every property owner makes the decision of what goes on his abutting property. Now, I think that one of the areas that it's not in our bylaws, and it's kind of a gray area for a property owner or an abutter, is that at that corner of a property, if you say no to the 50 feet and your next door neighbor says yes to the 50 feet, where that point is, there is an arc that goes around. And if you say no, then that arc goes 200 feet in front of your neighbor's property, because that's still 200 feet away from your property line. So, it becomes a little complicated, and it becomes something the planning board would have to look at. And frankly, it would have to be something that the applicant would have to address before he even came to you guys. But I'm thinking if we change the language to say an acknowledgement document, whether you want to waive the 200 feet or not, is better language, and it allows for people to say yes or no, as opposed to the language now, which is just a waiver.
What if they don't want to say anything? What if they refuse to sign? What happens to a project?
Then it reverts back to what the bylaw is, which is 200 feet.
Okay.
The bylaw as it
Because
stands.
what has happened is the projects have been held up or not allowed to move forward because they don't have the proper way or documents.
Right.
So that's,
Take them to court.
Well, that you can put in the bylaw language that states a failure to reply is a no vote.
there you go. Just to make sure,
Yeah.
if we're gonna do something like that, we
Right.
cover all the bases.
But the applicant's gonna have some sort of, to be able to demonstrate due diligence in attempting to get the acknowledgement.
Yes, yeah, and I think that, I think there are ways of doing that with registered mail, and,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
way conservation works with the butters.
Right.
Everyone is sent registered mail, so that, and we get the.
Certified mail,
Right,
certified, it's different.
certified,
Yeah.
right, so that the applicant would get replies back from everybody as to whether they received it or
Yeah.
not.
And then if they don't reply, the bylaw stands.
Right,
If they don't reply, that's seen as
As a no.
a no to a waiver.
Yeah.
And that could be in the letter that the applicant sends out. Failure to reply will result in a 200-foot setback as written in the bylaw. But that's 200 feet is the default.
Yeah.
In the RA zone.
Bruce, I got a good example.
Yeah,
Example,
yeah, please, everybody that speaks, please speak into the microphone.
Yeah, Steve Ward.
Thank you.
So back a few years ago, we were looking at putting solar at a property that I managed for cranberries, and one side of the property is a mother owns the property, and the other side is a daughter owns the property. So technically speaking, they wanted to do a solar project, and if we followed these, not having a waiver, it would have meant there was a 400-foot swath between the project, which was really kind of unnecessary. And I also worry that if you have, let's just say, a 100-acre parcel as a cranberry grower, and you put a solar array in one corner, it's probably 3,000 feet to the other side of the property. It doesn't make sense to have all the abutters sign a waiver. So I agree, there has to be some type of language in there like you were suggesting to help with that.
No, I think Savory came up with a good idea. It just didn't make sense to me, because I knew if I was a landowner, and I wouldn't want to sign a paper saying that they could come 50 feet if they were 2, 3, 4, 5, 600 feet away. It just doesn't make any sense. It kind of leaves you open, you know, to something that you don't want to happen. I like the flexibility in the law where you can get waivers from the neighbors. I don't think you're forcing anything on people. I know on the Meadow Street one, the people that were on one side of the project, that they were going to allow the 50 feet from their property. It was heavily wooded between their property and where the field was going to be, and from their property to their homes. Not all people are offended by solar projects. I know that there are some people that think solar projects are worse than having a landfill in the back of their yard, but then there are other people that I've talked to in town, and they welcome solar projects. It's not like it's a big deal to them. So I think that by allowing this, the option, if people want to waive it, the 200-foot and go to 50, I don't think you're forcing anybody to do that. The project that I think we got, oh, I was a little confused. I remember the project that Jen talked about with the people. This was kind of like a different thing, but
And which one was your project, Jen?
That's
72 Center Street
Center
was when
Street.
I was on.
on Center Street, there was a project that we had. That was Mr. Silver's project.
yes.
Yeah.
Is that Silver project? Well, there was a couple of things that went on, and that can be addressed here, but let me talk about that. Mr. Silver's project, there was several things that happened there and some of those things have been straightened out now, or at least the planning board knows how to handle them. The part that Jen was talking about was that we had neighbors that we had abutters to the solar field, and these people, because the way the property was set up, you really couldn't do screening on the applicant's property. So the people that were going to have the biggest view of the solar array, they stated that they would be happy with screening, and they would put it on their property. So there was an arrangement that was made between the solar company that first came before the board that was permitting the project, and they came up with an agreement with I think it was two neighbors, I believe. And they allowed, they allowed the screening to be on their property. And so what happened was, after discussions with the planning board and the solar company and the owners of the property, they decided, a decision was made that there would be estimates gotten from landscapers on the screening of these people's properties, and each people received a check for what it would cost to do the landscaping on their property. And it was up to those people to do the landscaping or not. And I don't know if they ever did or not. I know that Mr. Silva, although I really don't want to get into that, but so that's what happened with those neighbors.
Yeah.
Some of the neighbors were screened because the area was wooded, but those neighbors that were out in the open, they did get screening, they did receive money to do the screening, and they were, I never heard anything from those people. They seemed to be satisfied with that. That's just business. I don't really see anything wrong with that. That's, if it was my property and that came, and if it was agreeable to me to come up with an estimate for landscaping, and I would receive a check and go with that landscaper to do it, I can't, I mean, that would be fine.
Yeah. I just wanted to interject that I don't see how, I think the insinuation that a waiver is somehow, money's being passed under the table,
No.
that's just, I don't see a waiver meaning that at all.
No.
If this particular case bothers somebody, oh well. I mean, that was a deal between the solar company
Right.
and the neighbors. It had
Right.
nothing to do with the town. The town wasn't making deals. The town wasn't, passing money to people to be quiet.
Right.
I just don't think that that's even what we're talking about when we're talking about waivers.
But this sounds like it's sort of a one-off. It's the
Yeah.
only one you've had like
Yes.
this, right?
It's the only one I know of. I don't know.
Well,
Where the screening wasn't on the site, the screening was elsewhere.
wasn't on site. It was off site on the people's property that were affected by the site of the solar panels, and they agreed to it, and they were happy with it. There were other things with that project, and I know it was, we had several meetings here, and there was meetings with the select board and other.
Well, that's a separate issue, though.
Oh, okay, yeah, but anyway, the other problem with what happened with the planning board there was, there was also, there was a company, solar company that permitted the project, and then that permitted project was sold to another solar company for the installation. The owner of the property,
The first company
the first company
got the panels permitted at this height, and the
Right.
second company
Put-
got the building
installed them,
commissioner
yeah.
to agree
Yeah.
to the,
So-
but the only person that affected, and that was very unfortunate, was the landowner who
Right.
happened to live there.
Right.
So I'm not saying that was a good thing. That was not a good thing.
Well,
But it
the
didn't have
land-
to do with the butters.
Yeah, the
or waivers.
landowner had a good relationship with the permitting company, but didn't feel that he had such a good relationship with the company that did the installation. That is something that I think is in the bylaw. It's in the bylaw that if a solar panel is permitted by a company and they sell it, that second company has to come before the board
Right.
and discuss it.
Right.
And so
When did that go in, Bruce?
I believe it's in there. We could take a look.
I don't-
But what we've done, I remember doing, is we've also written in our decisions, or when I was on the board, we had it written in the decision that any company that purchases for installation has to come before the planning board and, you know, they also conservation, if it involves
Right.
conservation too.
Right.
To talk to the two boards to
Yeah,
make sure
yeah,
that.
so they know the
they get-
conditions of their permit.
Right,
and-
right.
mhm, Yeah.
So, that was also another thing that happened there. And the third thing that happened there was, which is, we'll have to take a look at, but the third thing was the height of the solar panels. And this was one of the earlier solar projects, and it so happened that, I think it was actually during COVID too, which was kind of a strain on everybody, but some of the solar panels were like 1 foot to 2 foot higher than was noted on a sketch on the plan that the planning board agreed to. Although it did say on the sketch approximate height
Well,
or
the
approximate.
plans would say not for construction,
Yeah.
for permitting purposes only. So I think they took whoever went to build it took that to mean, oh, we don't have to keep it at 8 feet, we can put it 9, 10
Right.
feet.
But I think it was just an approximate sketch. It wasn't to be exact. So now, well, when I was on the planning board, we also wrote that in the decision
Yeah,
that
yeah.
if,
That's the way to do it.
you know, you say the panels are gonna be 10 feet high, they have to be 10 feet high. Or they gotta come back to the planning board and discuss any changes like that. So those are the three things on that particular project, which did happen and which caused concern, but you know, as time goes on, every project that comes in, there's always something that happens, and I just don't think that we gotta throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's just that these are things that happen, and it should come back to the planning board and be looked at and then adjusted, and you know, or if we could adjust the bylaw to make it any clearer. Unfortunately, during COVID time, you know, we just didn't have people out there looking at all these things. People working part-time, and things were missed that ordinarily shouldn't have been missed, and so that's what happened to that particular project. I don't think that it was any big fault of bylaws at all.
Well, if I can just talk about that for just a second. One of the things that's not in the bylaw that I've penciled in here is a pre-construction conference. So pre-construction conferences are things that happen in lots of places, but there's nothing in our bylaw about it. And what the pre-construction conference is, when you're ready to start work, then you're meeting with the staff, the permitting staff, with your contractor, with the owner and everybody else, with the set of conditions to make sure everybody understands where things are at and how they play out. Trying to find sort of a spot to park that at, I looked at 25830, and we're going to get back to direct abutters, by the way, but this, since we got, so 35280 is about land clearing, soil erosion, and habitat impacts, and I added pre-construction conference. So what the bylaw presently says is, prior to any site disturbance and construction, the limits of the approved buffer zones and any approved site disturbances shall be surveyed and clearly marked by a professional land surveyor. Upon completion of the survey, the land surveyor shall verify to the planning board in writing that the limit of the work as shown on the approved site plans has been established on site. Clearing of natural vegetation shall be limited to what's necessary for construction, operation, and maintenance of the that whole initial thing, or otherwise prescribed by applicable bylaws, regulations, and bylaws. So I added, no clearing or site work can begin prior to a pre-construction conference held with the applicant, their contractor, contractors, and town staff, including the building commissioner, conservation agent, and town
Yeah,
planner.
that's good, that's good.
And what that does is make sure whoever's doing the project, that they understand what they have to do. And that saves a lot of heartache for a lot of different projects, by basically, and in this case, we're already saying, before you go out there and do anything, a surveyor's got to identify on a plan what's being cleared. And after that's done, then you bring all those goodies and everything else to a pre-construction conference. Now, right now, the bylaw says, upon completion, we'll verify to the planning board. So I just highlighted that in yellow, like, well, is the planning board, does it need to go to the planning board, or can it go to the in-house staff? Because bringing something to the planning board you know, it's a hearing, it's an appointment, it's 2 weeks out. It's just a little unwieldy sometimes for things like that. I think if we're gonna add something about change in ownership, but I don't see anything in the bylaw about change in ownership, that might be something to come to the planning board about. So if you got a change of ownership, you're the new owners, meet Carver, meet the board, come in, introduce yourself, and then they'll understand what the rules and regulations are, including the pre-construction.
Yeah, I think, I was thinking, and I think maybe you were thinking too, was, I think that was a proposed change when I had all those proposed bylaw changes, and it didn't work out too well that evening, so none of them got approved, most of them didn't get approved, and that was part of it, to do that. So that was in, some of those changes I've already read it was a couple meetings back when you weren't here, Tom.
I watched the tape.
Yeah, well, good, I'm glad we got it taped anyway, yeah. So, but yeah, I couldn't remember whether we had that in the bylaw or not.
It is.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I like the part that if it's the original developer who got the permit, they meet with the in-house staff, but if it gets sold, then now they have to come back to the planning board.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
think that.
there was a provision 35044, sale or transfer of a solar project.
Mhm.
The planning board administratively reviewed the decision plans and conditions of approval to ensure the project will be constructed and maintained according to the proposed site plan and special permit. So I think having the owners come in and introduce themselves, change of ownership, I think it's a great thing. And the pre-construction conference is a requirement to make sure that the new kids understand the rules of engagement that was permitted under.
Yep.
And the project's built as it's supposed to be.
If I may, if there is a new owner, I think that the owner should be required to meet with every commission that the original applicant had to meet with. So if it's something that also involves conservation, that the new owner needs to come in to meet conservation as well, to go over the orders of conditions, to make sure that that part of the equation is met with as well.
Okay.
Hearing or just a meeting?
Not just a meeting, it doesn't have to be a hearing. We just want to make sure that they understand this is what we agreed to with the first applicant. These are the same rules you have to follow as the new owner.
Yeah.
Okay, so transfer, look at that language that we put, that we proposed for 2021 that didn't go anywhere. 344, sale or transfer of project. In that, with that sale, the owners would have to meet with all the regulatory boards involved in permitting.
Yep.
That's what I understand?
All of the regulatory boards that the original applicant had to meet with, because there are some projects that don't involve every commission.
Yep. With all the regulatory boards that approved the project. So we're gonna get back to direct abutters, so we got transfer and we got pre-construction conference. Are people pretty comfortable with the idea of the pre-construction conference and the transfer?
Yep.
Mhm.
I think it's good.
So I'll plug those in, and send them out to folks,
Yeah.
prior to our next meeting, so people
I
get a
know.
chance to look at those things and make sure I got the language, quite right. So, back to the direct abutters. So, we're talking about the people who have to acknowledge or not acknowledge, are the people who are the immediate neighbors, the direct abutters.
Yes, but I think Savory's idea was a good idea.
Yeah.
Either if people are affected, they can sign off and say that I'm not affected by this. If people are willing to go with a waiver, then they should also sign off saying that they're willing to participate in a reduction of a setback. I think that's a thorough way of doing things.
So can you give me your verbiage again? And you can send it to me in an email as well, or just fix it when I screw it up when I type it.
Okay, I can do that. I would, basically, it's just changing the, it says here, provided standard setbacks and screening requirements are waived in writing by all direct abutters. It should not, I'll have to work on what that language is, but basically it's that an acknowledgement letter will be sent to all abutters asking if they are willing to waive the 200 feet to a minimum of 50 feet or not.
This says 25 in the schedule. It says the planning board may reduce setbacks, but in no instance shall setbacks be less than 25 feet when abutting a residential agricultural district.
Yeah, so there's two places where the reduced setbacks are at. They're in the dual use in 3570, and they're also in the setbacks earlier in the document at 35.
That's dual use, the chart. They're-
Yes.
Right.
So there's two places where they talk about those reduced
And where's
setbacks.
the other one? Sorry.
And it should probably be 50 feet at the dual use as well.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that was discussed at the planning board meeting
Yeah,
too.
they should be consistent.
Yeah, our last planning director came up with a bunch, there were discrepancies between the two, and that was one was 25 foot, and one was 50, and I think the planning board felt that maybe we should just make it 50 for both.
Yeah.
Mm.
So right now in the dual use, a minimum of 12.5 feet and a minimum of 25 feet in B and C, and we're saying both of those should be 50?
No, the
Mhm.
12.5 stays the same because that's adjoining properties under singular ownership, I believe.
Well, it's supposed to be. That's if bog owner, or two different bog owners, right? If it's bog owner A and bog owner B, and neither one of them mind what the other one's doing, then it
Right,
should be allowed to be
That's
12,
agricultural use. The
12 and a
other-
half feet.
I think just the 25 feet in 2C should be changed to 50.
Yeah.
And again, it wouldn't be waived in writing, it would be with an acknowledgement letter whether to waive or not the 200-foot or the 300-foot setback for, it's 300 feet, right, for dual use? Yeah.
So we're saying
No, no,
that,
it's,
instead of being
200, no,
25
it's
feet, would be
200.
50 feet?
that should be 50. And again, and screening requirements not are waived, that we have to put in the language there for the acknowledgement as to whether the,
Hmm.
whether the 200-foot is waived or not. All abutters need to have an acknowledgement as to whether the 200 feet bylaw is waived to a minimum of 50 feet.
And that's the language you're gonna
Yes.
send me, all right. So 50 feet, but we're still at 25 feet, or 12.5 feet?
The
Yes.
12.5 is just for,
If you're bog to bog,
Or agriculture.
Or agriculture.
Yes.
right.
By the way, GL 128-1A is smaller than the CMR earlier. I looked at these things. One's 350 pages, this one's mercifully shorter, about what those agriculture uses are. It's a couple paragraphs. It includes fur-bearing folks, swine-bearing folks,
Oh, okay.
so all agricultural uses, although primarily they're going to be cranberries here. So we're good with that?
Yep.
Yeah, again, that was a change. I know some people don't like the change of the bylaws, but you come into different projects that, and you come into all different situations that you didn't imagine when you first made the first bylaw up, so things would change. But the 12 and a half feet was, we all of a sudden came to two solar projects that were abutting each other, different owners, and instead of having 50 feet or 200 feet from the property line to each one, we came up with something that was 12 and a half feet, so, so that would be fine between the two cranberry bog owners.
It's basically a row.
Yes.
between-
Right,
For
right.
fire break. And
Yeah.
I mean, we also had that problem with, we had cranberry growers that had multiple parcels of land that abutted one another.
Mhm.
So, and then what happened was is that later on, they started combining the properties, so it was just a matter of surveyor drawing a plan and combining it and send it to the registry, so make two properties one, and so then you didn't have to have a space in between the fields. You could do a field right over the old property lines. So those are things that we encountered that could never be envisioned by the original founders of the solar bylaw.
Yeah.
So going back up to 2.5.21.1, other setbacks, so under B, and this is not in the dual use, setbacks to be reduced to a minimum of 12.5 feet by right where abutting arrays are proposed in mutual partnership ownership or in common ownership that transcends, and I don't know who came up with transcends, but it's probably not the best word, existing lot lines. So are we keeping 12.5 feet at this point with that sort of language?
Yes.
That's what I would think. Well,
Well, so what does that, so that setbacks to be reduced to a minute 12.5 feet by right where abutting arrays are proposed. Now, this is in, so these are two property owners that are next to each other, that's how this, what this means?
and that allows a
And a-
roadway between the two
and
sets of
it'll-
arrays.
Okay, so the fields have to be 12.5 feet from the property line. So between the two fields, it would be 25 feet.
Yeah.
So that was something that came about because two solar fields were being proposed, different owners, but in order for it to happen, they brought the panels closer to the property line. So they had a reduction in the setbacks, which this allows.
Okay, I'm just making sure we touch them all, where we've got some difference in the setbacks. So we're changing dual use, but we're not changing this one.
But isn't it the same as dual?
No, we're
Because it's
different.
not agricultural?
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Yeah,
Dual use is only, the SMART program is only for agricultural
Yeah.
use.
Yep.
So that's why the language is in there for that chart.
So in this case where you had two folks who were both industrially zoned properties, and they're saying, well, we're industrial right now, we're at 50-foot setbacks for for a non-residential solar array. So they could take that 50-foot and reduce it down to 12.5 feet.
Well, the way the bylaw is written right now, that Bruce just talked about, it says, arrays are proposed in mutual partnership / ownership. So there has to be something legally binding those two property owners, or common ownership, meaning there's one owner of both properties. So it can't just be.
They have two lots.
Yes,
They
but
have
it,
two
so
lots.
it doesn't seem to me that the bylaw says it just can be two disparate adjoining abutters, or adjoining
Well,
property owners.
I think that was the intention, maybe that's not clear, because it does say when solar project abuts a bog or other
No,
agricultural.
I'm not talking about, I'm talking about
Then it's a 12.5 setback.
no, I'm talking about 3580, not the,
I am talking about 3580, 25.1.1, the dimensional requirements. I don't think it was meant to limit it to just you own two bogs together. I think it meant if you and I own two bogs side by side. Is that,
That's as I recall.
yeah, that's, yeah. It
Yeah.
should cover that
which could be,
situation as well.
which could be a mutual partnership.
That
I'm
sounds
just
like
reading what it
common
says. It
I know,
says
well, it
mutual
needs to be-
partnership or ownership,
No, I understand. That sounds like it's an ownership.
or common ownership. So mutual partnership or ownership means two owners that have
I think it should be more clear. I think it should say either they're commonly owned by one owner, or it's two separate owners who have a mutual agreement or something like that. Partnership sounds like,
Oh, so this, I can't.
My company.
I can't remember an example, but there's probably one where, okay, so two owners that had abutting properties, they were gonna develop a solar field together under
Well,
one
it-
solar company. Yeah, so
could be that, but they
so
could be
wanted-
doing it separately too. As long
And you
as
could be doing
both
it
okay with
separately,
it.
right.
Yeah,
If the,
that was what I was thinking.
yeah, so it does cover
Yeah.
different things.
I just didn't want it to sound like it was, that I had to own both bogs in order for it to be okay, because I don't think that was the intent.
So if Savory and Steve are a joint applicant on a solar project.
Yes, or even if they're not joint applicants, maybe Savory does his first, and then Steve goes, ooh, that's a great idea, 2 years later.
No, that wasn't the intent. The
I
intent was
think it
for it
was.
to be a singular project.
Yes,
Like,
Well,
that's correct.
Bruce
I
owns
think
this
so,
bog,
yeah.
I own this bog. We want to work together. So we do a joint application. So since we are working together, we wouldn't have to have 50 feet from mine, 50 feet from yours, and that's huge because it's one project. We can agree together, since it's one project, we will reduce it together. But that's one project at a time, not Bruce does his, I do mine. This was, if we're
Because then all of a
working
sudden
together.
you've got 37 and a half feet with no solar, and like, oh, I'm gonna come back and put 37 and a half, so I can get to 12 and a half feet.
Right, so
It
that's.
seems like they gotta be at the same time.
Right, that's Bruce and I saying, let's do this together. And then we say between our own bogs, we need 12 and a half feet.
As long as it's clear that there can be different owners, I think that's.
Different,
the
but
main
same
thing.
project,
Yeah,
one
it's the
project
same
at a time.
project, yeah.
Like, not different owners, different projects, one application.
So setbacks can be reduced to a minimum of 12 and a half feet by right where abutting arrays are proposed in mutual partnership, ownership, or common ownership. So I think what needs to be kind of plugged in here is a joint application.
That's exactly right.
If that was really the intent, then
Yeah.
it should say that.
Yeah,
That's
that's
good.
exactly what I was writing. Our abutting arrays are proposed
'Cause
through
It doesn't say that.
a mutual application or common ownership.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jim.
Yeah.
That's the way to look at it.
Yeah, but it didn't say that, so that does need to be
That make sense?
put in
Yeah,
there.
because it was one project,
Yeah.
but potentially two owners, like not throwing Roger in here, but the one we did. Roger, didn't you work with the Waynios and someone else
Yep.
too? So it was one project that came before the planning board, but there were three owners. And that was before this. So Roger said he'll work with them and him. And back in the day, this didn't exist, so they had to have big gaps. So we said, Roger and two people want to do it together. They can agree, okay, between our properties, let's smush it together. But they had come with one project, so it's a per project basis.
So it needs to just say it's the same project. That needs to be
Where abutting
clarified.
arrays are proposed in a joint application.
Mhm. Yep.
Or common ownership.
Yep.
Just making sure I got that right. I think it's the air conditioning so we don't get overheated.
So much better. It is cold in here.
Yeah, there should be just a fan on or off button instead of having to change the temperature.
Sorry, it may be cold in here, but otherwise you can't hear anybody talk. All right, anything else with that? All right. I guess we covered that particular thing, what a direct abutter is, which was encompassed a lot of things there.
Well, and I do think that we need to, in addition to noting who is signing, that we likely need that definition of a direct abutter as well. That says it's the people who are right next door.
Well, who share the same property line as the property of the project.
And one of the things that's been discussed in other places, so direct abutter is an owner of a property as shown in the most recent applicable tax list that is adjacent to the property seeking a permit. Is adjacent clear enough?
Yeah, it means next to.
So one of the things that some folks have talked about is like, well, that doesn't seem fair that only the owner gets to decide these. What if somebody's renting something? But Massachusetts, in their notice to parties of interest, don't note tenants, they note owners. So that's why I've kept it as a property owner, because even property owners move as well. Maybe not as often in some places as other places, but there's been nothing I've found that says someone who's renting the property next door has some sort of right to intervene in this sort of thing. So that's why it's stuck with owners, and what's the assessor's list is the owners.
Anybody have anything else to say about number 1 before we move on to number 2? All right, seeing none. So number 2 was, we're discussing the interconnection requirement. And the interconnection requirement is 3580.26.3. And that says all utility connections from a LSG MSPI shall be placed underground unless soil conditions, shape, or topography of the site and any requirements of the utility provider dictate above-ground installation. Electrical transformers for utility interconnections may be above ground if required by the utility provider. So, all right, any discussion on?
I think that anything that we have in there that's noted that what the utility provider claims is claiming should be removed. We've already had Eversource come in and say they don't set any requirements and that they go with whatever the town says. So I know that I get the impression that all the applicants that come before us use that as an excuse to say, well, we're giving them what they want, what Eversource wants, and they're not actually focused on putting everything underground as much as possible.
All right.
The utility said, if you want them underground, we'll put them underground.
Yep.
And the Eversource, when they spoke to us, they said, whatever your bylaws say, we'll build to. But the applicants are not giving them projects in accordance with underground or in the ground. They're submitting stuff to them saying, putting it on poles above ground. And so I think that the applicants are using the get out of jail card, so to speak, to do it the cheapest way that they want to do it, as opposed to the way that the town wants it to happen. And claiming that it's Eversource's requirements. Because everybody has come in and said, this is what Eversource says we have to do.
So the bylaw, it looks like it actually reads, shall be placed underground. Is that?
Yeah, this is the bylaw. I highlighted it in yellow because we want to come back to it. So what Bruce says. So what I just did is just lined out what John had just said.
Okay.
Unless soil conditions, shape, or topography of the site or any requirements of the utility provider dictate above-ground installation. So that section would now say, all utility connections shall be placed underground.
Okay.
Electrical transformers for utility.
What if there are soil condition, shape, or topography?
Yeah, that should stay in. What should be?
There's not.
Preclude that.
100%, I know for a fact, everything can be put underground if you're willing to pay for it. 100%.
How do you know that for a fact?
They can build stuff to the Cape. I have,
They can what?
they're building the wind stuff through the vineyard, under the ocean. If you can put something under the ocean, you can put something under anything.
We don't live on a fault line,
Right,
so we don't have
there's-
to worry about that.
Yeah, it can be done, it just costs more.
Well, having been in the construction, in the civil engineering business, and sometimes you can put things underground and sometimes you can't. It all depends. In Carver, we mostly have sandy soil, but, so, you know, it may be easier. I just hate to, I
But
hate to
if-
throw a blanket coverage on something, because you never know what you're going to encounter in the field. I mean, I've worked in other towns in the area where there's been ledge and rocks and boulders, and so things
We
did
have a
have to
section of
go
ledge.
above ground. So occasionally, those things do happen. It is more expensive to put things, probably it's more expensive, I would think, to dig trenches and put it in some sort of conduit. But if that's required by our bylaw, then it's required by our bylaw. At some point in time, though, when they get to the street, and sometimes they have to cross the street to connect to the main lines, and you can do it two ways. You can either bore under the road and then connect, you have to connect to a pole and then connect to your main line. Or you can put a pole on the opposite side of the street and then jump the line over the road to the main line. And so a lot of people, and I was surprised when we did talk to Eversource, they said that they would consider going under the road. A lot of people don't like, and I don't know how the DPW feels about this, they don't like to do borings under the road because sometimes that leaves over time, it leaves a depression in the road where they bore. It kind of washes out over time. And so they don't like to do that. They'd rather place a pole on one side of the road and lift the line up and have it cross the road that way, so that it doesn't destroy the road. And it all depends upon the age of the road too. If you have an older road and well, not in Carver so much, but if you have an older road that's going to be renovated, they don't mind going underground because knowing that there's going to be new pavement, the road's going to be reconstructed. If you have a new road, there are, in some areas, I don't know if it goes by the state or by the town, but a lot of towns, once you place a new road in, they don't want any underground disturbance on that road, and it's usually set for like 4 or 5 or 6 years or something. They don't want any digging in the street. So a lot of times when the town is notified or the electrical or gas companies are notified that a road is going to be reconstructed, they'll come in and put in new gas lines, and whatever's underneath that needs to be repaired, do that, and then put a new road over it, and then they say, we're not going to dig up the road unless it's a dire emergency. But I thought when we had the discussion with Eversource, I thought that they were had a good explanation for what they do. I think that, and I don't know if they have the people to do this, but when you work in a construction and you work with Eversource and a solar company and the town, everybody has to come together to work out these problems. And I think that the solar company has to work maybe more closely with Eversource to come up with a realistic plan. It seems like the people that we spoke to at Eversource were willing to do that. I know when plans are first developed, you know, the engineers, they're concerned about the solar field, the placement, where they're gonna put all the utilities and everything else, and that's sort of like the last thing, the connection probably that they worry about. But it's something that they have to spend more time on, I think, to come up and to make sure that it's as correct as can be. And who knows, as time goes on, there may be minor adjustments, which could come before the planning board to take a look at. So that, I know we did have one project, and this is one when Jen was on the board, and where we were gonna, we were given a verbal agreement that maybe we'd have lesser poles at the end of the street, and it didn't work out that way. It never got on the plan, and the plan wasn't checked before we signed the plan. And so that's something that has to be done. It should be done on every project. The plan has to conform with everything that was agreed upon, and in that particular instance, it may have been overlooked.
Mr. Chair, can I just add something? So I would be thrilled if all these things were put underground, but I also know that, just as an example, our wetlands protection bylaw has a variance clause that's supposed to be used only in very, very extreme situations, and it reads just like that. Unless soil conditions, shape, or topography of the site, preclude doing whatever it is that they're asking to do. And so, we used to get a soil scientist to come in to tell us what's the reason. Any other expert, the applicant would pay for it. I think the part of that should be deleted is and any requirements of the utility provider, because apparently they don't have one. They're deferring to the town. But I do think, because we are over 50% wetlands, for example, we do have one section of town that has a whole ridge of ledge. I can tell you where it is, but which would be almost impossible to put anything underground. Is it going to happen a lot? Probably not. But it seems to me, just like with a variance, that should only be used when they have no other choice.
Yes.
And none of this utility provider stuff, because apparently they're fine with putting it underground.
Well, I mean, even what would happen if, there was, like I said, there are so many situations that come up that you just can't imagine. But if you were in a wetland area where there was a bog, where there was a gravel road, and that was where they were gonna place the electrical utilities to get out to the street, and say the water levels were high there, that's another reason why you couldn't go underground. If you were digging a ditch and it was going to be, the bottom of the ditch was at the same level as the water table in that area, it would prohibit.
That would be covered under soil conditions. Yeah.
Right. So there are different things that can happen that I think, to me, flexibility is a great thing in the bylaws. And so it just makes it that the planning board has to make that determination, and also conservation too. But that's why you have these people on the boards to look over these situations. But I just can't see making bylaws that make it impossible to do any kind of development, or make it so difficult that you don't have alternatives to go to.
So, the planning board has I forget what the word is, but there's a fund that the developer pays into that pays for the planning board to hire their own consultants for a project, and same with conservation. So if it looks, you're looking at the topographical map and it looks like this might be wet, and the developer's claiming it is, you would need to hire someone. But and then if it turns out the developer just said that, they'd have to be above ground. There would probably be very few, underground, sorry. There'd probably be very few situations, but I can think of some, because we certainly have them.
Yeah.
So how do we feel about just nuking the utility provider and leaving soil conditions in?
Yeah.
I agree.
I think if anything, it should be the reverse, that they have to prove that Eversource says we cannot do this. Maybe Eversource should know, due to a soil condition or something, we can't do it.
But Eversource doesn't get involved until the interconnection point.
No,
Right, but they can they can come back and say, like, we can't do. If anyone says that, it should be them. Leaving the soil shape and topography in makes it so subjective. To one board, topography is one thing, and another.
It's not.
What does topography mean? Is there a definition of topography?
Have you looked at the USGS topographical maps?
But this does not reference that. This just says a board can say, oh, the topography, it makes sense that it's above ground.
Well, I
It's
think, I think
subjective.
the planning board and conservation staff members know what topography is.
But that's
And
what,
whether they're using the correct
but
maps.
we got in trouble with the other one, with the planning board. One planning board applied the setbacks one way, another one applied it another way, and now the court said, well, you gotta do what the second one said. This is too subjective. I think John's right.
You have to allow for more than just underground, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, if required by the utility
But the
provider.
utility.
But they don't care.
But the utility company has already stated they don't care.
I would definitely leave the utilities out of it.
Yeah, the utility company said,
They know
you want them underground, we'll put them underground.
Right.
That's the clearest thing that I've ever heard a utility company say.
But this, well, this is a utility connection, so. All right, so this is only for a short distance. I mean, if you have a solar field that's 600 feet from the road, all connections by law are underground, unless that's waived by the planning board and allowed to use poles, which can also happen too.
So do you want something in there to the effect of all utility connections as viewed from a public way?
No.
No?
I wouldn't add
All right.
anything to it. I would just take out the part about the utility company.
Yep. Do you need a motion, Mr. Chair?
Electrical transformers.
Yeah, so it should read, underground unless soil conditions, shape, or topography of the site dictate above-ground installation.
Right. Second. Was that a motion?
So it's gonna,
Well, we
Dress it
should
up
put
so
in
it
there
looks
some
like
sort
this.
of professional type of acknowledgement, as that
Like
the
per some
shape,
standard.
topography of the site dictate above-ground installation as determined by
Professional
A
engineer.
qualified
a qualified
surveyor.
professional engineer or something.
What if, I understand what you're saying, what if you just, right before, right after the word unless, you put in the word proven? Unless proven soil conditions, shape, or topography of the site
No, you
dictate.
should put in by a determined by a professional, somebody, engineer, surveyor.
unless
Soil
condition,
scientist.
shape, and topography of the site as verified by a qualified engineer?
I suppose.
Or,
Yeah, but that,
No, that
that's-
gives them the opportunity to go out and, on their own and find
and it also
someone.
gives
Right,
the
it would be,
boards,
like, has to be of the town's choosing or something, some
Well,
standard that we
anything that
control.
comes to the planning board. The planning board is allowed to charge the owner or the developer. Developer can give the town the funds, the town hires its engineer to go out there and look at it, or do whatever they do. That same with conservation. What is the name of that fund, Tom?
R&I is the
Yeah.
review and
Review.
inspection.
Thank you. It's been a while.
Well, could it be done with a special permit?
No, that,
Everything's a special permit with solar.
yeah. So I would just put, reviewed by, professional engineer, soil scientist, surveyor.
As determined by.
yeah, but it isn't up to the utilities to do this.
No, we've cut the utilities from there. That's been
All
cut.
right.
They're gone.
They're-
See the red line? They're gone.
Utilities come in only at the connection.
Right. So all so
We redlined at any requirements of the utility provider. That's gone.
I still don't get it.
So we're suggesting that it reads, unless determined by a professional engineer, surveyor, soil scientist, as hired by the town or something, that soil conditions, shape, or topography of the site dictate above-ground installation. Period. No utility company.
Then based on what Bruce was saying, should we acknowledge the tie-in point if it's across the road to prevent potential damage to the roadway and allowing for,
But wouldn't that fall under,
could we do that as like a subsection?
would you even need to address it if the planning board says, okay, you need to go underground to here, then you can come up and do what you need to do across the road? Wouldn't that be part of the discussion of the entire project with the planning board? Because of
I would think so.
the soil conditions of the road, they would say, that's when you come up and you go across. You know, you're underground to here, then you can come up. And that's what they should be doing in reviewing the project and permitting the project.
I think if we add something as like an intent of the bylaws for somebody to review, we could do that.
I mean, we have a.
Because when you're sitting around discussing it between the 5 people, you're gonna have somebody who's gonna be like, this is what it says.
So the question,
This is what it says.
so if we add, shall be placed underground unless soil condition, shape, or topography of site, as verified by the town consulting engineer, dictates above-ground
That's
installation.
good, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That
mean,
covers it.
that's, I was just gonna say, we have a consulting engineer.
Yeah,
We're not gonna, yeah, I mean, that's the only way to go.
Yep.
But, I mean, this whole concern is just if there's poles at the edge of the road that are gonna carry the wire over the road. And in some cases, there's a pole carrying a transformer, and in some cases, the lines come up and up the pole and over. Sometimes they have several poles, sometimes they have a support pole. That's not really a call that the engineering company that's permitting the plans really comes up with. That's something that the
Well,
utility company comes up
I thought all this was referring to the underground before you get to the road.
with. Right, right,
I think that's what this is.
Yeah.
I think,
okay. But it does say utility connection, that's what starts this whole thing. Oh, okay, so utility connection.
So you're running it
meaning
from
it's a
the
connection
panels
from the solar field
to the road.
street.
yeah.
All right.
So all utility connections from all those initials shall be placed underground unless soil conditions, shape, or topography of the site, as verified by the town's consulting engineer, dictate above-ground installation.
Mhm.
People are good with that?
Okay.
In spite of the fact both of my kids are engineers, I still can't spell engineer, and I write it all the time. I do very bad with initiative, too. Too many I's.
I still think that this is good, but I think that the permitting company still has to work a little more closely. And hopefully, it seems like in this particular case, Eversource, that's in our area here, was a little more agreeable. They even gave us numbers to call to certain engineers or engineering staff to talk to.
Yep.
And even before a lot of the stuff comes to the planning board, you know, these things should be ironed out, and so that they have a realistic plan, and that they can bring to the planning board and say, this is, unless we run into some huge problem here, this is the way it's gonna look. This is the way it's gonna be. So that at least then comments can be made by the planning board on how they feel about it, and with confidence.
Mr. Chair, I know we have to, can I just make one little change to this list of concerns while we're here, so people, so it's on number 8. I just wanted, so that was mine, and I don't think I meant that they had been addressed. What I meant was health and safety concerns need to be addressed, but we need to get all the facts about any potential health or safety concerns from the experts.
Right.
That was my whole statement.
Yeah.
That was all.
All right. On interconnection, are we finished with that?
Just to be clear, we're leaving in the line about the transformers, as is?
Yeah, because typically a transformer,
Okay.
even with its underground utilities in a subdivision, the transformer's
Okay.
on a pad.
Because
So-
again, it says if required by the utility provider.
Required by the utility provider.
I don't, you know, they said they didn't have requirements, but I would assume that this would probably be one.
You're saying something like that take the utility company out of transformers as well?
Yeah, yeah.
They may, they don't have to be.
Yeah, that just says they can be above ground no matter what.
Yeah, taken out if required, that
Right.
means that they can be above ground.
Right. For no reason, for any reason. Leaving the other part in is, again, like Bruce says, in the odd chance that it can't be. It's about giving proof, not just having an applicant come in and say, oh, I gotta put poles in because of this, or I can't do this. This is, now the town's engineer has to prove it, so that's putting some
I think
ownership on the town. And
Removing that entire line.
this just requires proof that it cannot be underground. The way that you worded it and changed it, if we leave that red
Or it
part
can
in,
be
it's just to
on-
prove it.
Yeah, on the ground.
Yeah.
The transformers won't get
I
it.
can't hear you, John.
I'm sorry, what Jen was saying is that the transformers would have to be on the ground versus above ground. Like, they can be on poles or on the ground, they won't go in the ground.
Well,
But-
but I would think that would have to depend upon what Eversource has to say. I mean, they may have a reason. I mean, right now, if you have a transformer, it can either be on the ground, usually it's on a concrete pad,
Right.
and on the ground, or sometimes they pole mount them and put them at the top
Right,
of the
and
pole.
that's why I was saying, just remove that last line altogether, and then everything is worked out in the plan itself.
No, I think that needs to stay there. So it's very clear.
Well, no, I mean, if the two options are on a pole or on a pad, then both of those are above ground. So
Yes.
you're right, you don't need
Right.
it.
There was, I think it was on the Meadow Street.
Well,
We
I'm
did
sorry.
have-
Isn't an electrical transformer a utility connection? Because if it is, the sentence before that says it has to be underground, except unless their soil conditions are proven, blah, blah.
Generally,
So now we're saying the electrical transformers have to be underground.
well, generally, a transformer comes at the road.
I understand what it is,
Yeah.
but isn't it a utility connection too? It's a type of utility connection? Well, the reason I'm asking, I think it is, and the reason I'm
Yeah.
saying, but it's a different type from the one you're talking about putting underground. So if you're happy with the electrical transformers being above ground, I think it needs to stay there. And it implies the two types of above ground are okay, because if you get rid of that sentence, it means it
Yes.
has to go underground.
No, yes, I wouldn't change that, I would keep that.
So leave it the way it was all the way, from the beginning.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so undo the strike through. I'm fine with that.
So we're saying it's gonna look like that? Electrical transformers for utility interconnections may be above ground if required by the utility provider.
Yep,
All right.
fine.
People good with it?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if that's it for number two. Okay, as far, Sarah did go, spoke about number 8 was with the health and safety concerns addressed. I guess we could just talk about this for a minute. I know, well, I have to ask Tom a question. I didn't want to interrupt if you were putting something
I'm good.
together there. Okay. Do we have more people that are going to speak at a forthcoming meetings?
I have not been able to find, I found a lot of folks, a lot of information about journals and articles and things like that, but have not found somebody from the fire marshal's office or anybody like that who's willing to come here. I've talked to folks at DOE. I've been to about 4 or 5 different agencies. So the other thing I did after that is started leaning into some of Medway's information to see if Medway had some information about safety and sighting and things like that, and they do. So we may be looking at borrowing some of their information as far as documents go. And if I can find a hearing where someone talked about those things, then I'll get a copy of it and run it for us. But for whatever reason, I have not been able to find somebody. And like I said, I have been to state agencies and I've been to the local fire chiefs that I know as well and said, have you got somebody? And they basically have all told me the same thing, that finding a fire safety engineer is exceedingly difficult these days. The apartments they built in Kingston, the safety engineer the town used to review those was from Texas. It's just, I don't have a good explanation, but.
Maybe
you
we
know.
could have a Zoom meeting.
Well, it'd be great to Zoom them, but like I said, I have not, I'm 0 for all of them so far. And still looking for them. So, but I have been mining the Medway site for information. And I've got a few things for battery storage and stuff like that from them that we'll, talk about our next meeting perhaps.
Okay.
But
Tom, is UMass Clean Energy Extension?
yeah, I talked to the Clean Energy Center.
Yeah.
I talked to a DOER, talked to the fire marshal.
Yeah.
I don't have the full list, but like I said, it's 4 or 5 different agencies that I looked at. And he said, well, maybe these guys have got somebody.
I talked to Blue Wave today, and they said they have a battery department, and they would certainly be willing to send one down to do a presentation if you'd like.
That'd be
But-
great.
But,
Yeah, I'll be
They
happy
do
to,
they do
I've been looking at public sector agencies. I haven't looked
that's
at.
what I was trying to, do something with an education
Yep.
center, like a university, where they're more impartial. But
A university, yeah.
yeah.
Yep. That would be good.
If we could get somebody down from MIT to talk about some of the real high technology stuff, be interesting.
Yeah, I said, I've been chasing
And-
that, but,
And is there an opportunity to go down as a field trip to that Provincetown battery storage? That takes quite a block of time, but is that something we should be doing?
Yeah, I've looked at that online, and it's much smaller than Cranberry Point that's been proposed for Carver. We were told at the planning board level that anything like the size of Cranberry Point would only be able to take place at a substation with the electrical connection that they have there. But I didn't realize, as I did more research, that there are smaller, and I think that the one in Provincetown is like the 10th of the size of Cranberry Point. And it doesn't appear from Google Maps, anyway, I Googled it, it didn't appear to be near any transmission lines. But that is a battery storage that's at the DPW, I believe, in a DPW building at the, in Provincetown.
Yeah, the transfer station.
Oh, the transfer station, yeah, okay.
And I guess I'm kind of looking for, I mean, maybe could we get the fire prevention office, fire safety officer from Provincetown? I'm sure they reviewed that project. Or from Medway, or one of their experts.
Well, I'll be,
That'd be
I just
Maybe
looked
the-
up,
Or maybe the fire team that, in Arizona that had to deal with the battery fire.
Yeah, that they were never even told what that project was about, what was in there. I'm sure there are many other projects since then where the fire departments had to sign off on it because of that.
So two things, I'll drop a line to Thaddeus Cole, who's the town planner in P-Town,
Okay.
just to see who they might have. And Blue Wave, I don't know if Mark Sylvia, the former Plymouth Town manager, is still associated with them, but I'll reach out to Blue Wave as well.
I talked with Mike Z.
With who?
Mike Z, Z-H-E.
Z-H-E, okay. And that's with Blue Wave.
Yeah.
All right, so do we want to hop back up to 3?
So that was yeah, for battery storage. Does anybody want to hear anybody speak anything more about solar panels?
Well, if I may, real quickly, I remember, I forget whether it was, I think it was 2019, the solar canopies article got shot down. And the argument was that solar panels are harmful to their children.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, that's just outrageous, because every article, I've read a lot, I mean, these are solid state things. Everything I've read indicates the contrary. And I think surely there's someone we can contact at, maybe like Steve said, at one of our universities, who can tell us, you know, what's in these things, how are they made? When they're out in the backyard, are they gonna hurt anybody?
Right.
Because if the answer is no, people need to know that. And if the answer is yes, people need to know that.
Is the UMass, Steve, is the UMass, they have the station at the Carver Wareham line. Do
Cranberry
they have anybody
Extension.
that, or did they ever study the panels? I know that they did the elevated solar panels over cranberry bogs, and there's been a study about that. I was wondering if there's anybody there that would like to speak about the safety of solar panels.
They don't have the knowledge that we need. They're great. But as I was reading through, the UMass Clean Energy Extension had some nice guidance on battery storage. And I didn't go as far as calling anybody, but if UMass beyond the Cranberry Station had somebody, then let's grab them
Yeah.
and get them on Zoom.
Yeah, exactly.
Put some of our concerns to rest,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Well, all I know is that it seems with the election of the new governor that, you know, there's going to be more emphasis on battery storage and on solar panels. And they're really trying to do more with solar and battery storage. And I wish that they had people that could, you know, speak about that. You know, that could give us some information, because I mean, this is something that they've mandated on all the communities in Massachusetts, that we must have solar, we must have battery storage, and there are people, of course, that have concerns about these things, and you'd think that there would be something where people could be educated and their fears would, you know, it would, you know, explain to them.
Well, I think that the new Attorney General has started a new secretariat. I'm not sure
No,
about
that's the
that.
governor.
I mean, the governor, excuse me,
yeah.
the governor, right.
Climate, yeah.
Yeah, so, I I just heard an interview with her, and she sounded pretty knowledgeable. Maybe we could contact them. Yeah.
But as a kind of a skeptic on these things, it's hard to accept people saying how safe these things are when every week you read a new article about something that went up in flames. I mean, just over Christmas, a Megapack 2, Tesla Megapack 2 caught fire. That's supposed to be the newest and safest. Went up in flames while people were standing around watching, caused a half-mile shelter-in-place order.
Where did that happen?
California.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything about that.
And no, you don't. But every now and then articles pop up. They make their way through.
And I know that. I'm just, I want as many facts as we can get. I don't want a lot of alternative facts that may not be true, but because we don't know, because we're not experts, you know, everyone can have their own fact. We're all entitled to our own opinions, but not our own facts.
Right.
Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's a new, solar and battery storage are new, and they're developing. And things happen. I remember with the skateboards, in this was-
Hoverboard.
Oh, the
years
hoverboards.
back, or yeah.
Yeah, and the Samsung phones.
And everybody's, every week, somebody's house would catch on fire as they were charging their skateboard. And now you don't hear so much about it. So it's just, everything's developing. So accidents and things happen. It's how to prevent them and actually what to do if something like this happened. Not to say that it's an everyday occurrence, but things are going to happen. There are accidents. People have accidents in their cars every day. There are things that happen all the time. That doesn't mean that people aren't still driving their cars to work or wherever they have to go.
And as I said, Medway had a fair amount of information about that. I've been curating that and not trying to throw the whole website at you guys, but put out some of those things about best practices for siting of battery energy storage and things like that. And in addition, in your book from day one, we had DOER's Q&A about best practices and questions about solar and glare and chemicals and things like that. So that's in your package already. I've looked to see if they've updated that. It's still the 2015 version of that bylaw, but clearly that's one of the things that we want to make sure that the perception of something and the actual of something are sometimes two different things. And I know there's a lot of people back in the day who were worried about high tension lines and are they giving me cancer? And there's been a lot of studies about electromagnetic fields that show that there really isn't a correlation between those two things. And I would probably say, not that I was familiar with, that's what took out the solar arrays, the carports, but likely a similar sort of thought that, that's just like those high tension lines. It's
Yeah, I remember a lot of discussion about people saying that, talking about it was more, I remember hearing discussions about like ugly construction and not, really being, detracting from the layout of the town,
Architecture,
the aesthetics of the
buildings.
town itself, and that that's not something that I mean, I heard people talking about it. So I don't really subscribe to something like that. I think if we can utilize parking lots over instead of forests for solar,
one of the things that we did in Falmouth, and like a lot of towns are doing, is trying to push parking to the rear of buildings. So in a form-based code zoning bylaw we put together where the building's front on the street and the parking's in the back, that's the perfect complement to Well, the parking is in the back, so would the carports, and so they're not in the public realm when you're looking at that.
Right.
But of course, that requires two things, that the project is oriented to a place where the building's not casting a shadow on the parking lot. So if your building casts a shadow on the parking lot, there's not gonna be solar on that, so it doesn't work for everyone.
Right.
But, my own thoughts are, I love these solar carports for two reasons. Everybody who comes into a business gets to park in the shade, out of the weather. All the storm water that hit the parking lot typically and would go into a catch basin, it mixes with oil and transmission fluid and whatever in the parking lot. If you've got solar canopies up there, that water is caught with a downspout and infiltrated directly into the ground. So you've got clean water going into the ground versus a mix of whatever might hit the parking lot. So you get better protection for the people who come in. You get power to the site, and you get better stormwater to deal with. So I'm a fan on all three of those sides. But somebody's going to have to be able to fund it, and they're more expensive than other things. We did them at the Cape Cod Fairgrounds, and they're doing solar canopies all over Cape Cod Fairgrounds. And when that came out to see what they were building, the thing about putting them in a parking lot is they've got this giant concrete thing at the bottom, and then this giant steel beam that comes up to hold the array, because it's got to hold up to wind stress and things like that. So they're considerably more bulky in your parking lot than they are out in the field, where you're just driving a pile into the ground or something like that. And the other thing we want to make sure when we were looking at that in Falmouth is, if you're putting these canopies in, are they eliminating some of the parking spots that you need? But most people in my business think that we require way too much parking than is necessary these days. But if somebody's got a requirement to have 80 parking spaces and you put solar canopies in the parking lot and you lose 3 parking spaces, is that are they now in violation of their permit? So but I think canopies for the most part are a great idea. And it's already written in your bylaw, so it's pretty low-hanging fruit, but it's not on the warrant at this point.
Right.
The warrant's closed, so solar canopies may be a future feature.
Yes. Maybe, I mean, there were 3 concerns by people, as John said, that people were concerned about aesthetics. They were concerned about if the solar arrays would be harmful. As far as the aesthetics, they were in, a lot of them, they showed the police station, they were gonna be back of the police station. The other ones in front of the school, I don't know, I think you'd have to come up with some drawings of what they would look like. I know the MBTA stations in Situate, Cohasset, Hingham, they all have canopy covers. Stonehill College has a parking lot with canopy covers. So these things can be viewed. I think just exactly what John said. I think it's better to use the parking lots than it is to cut down woods or whatever. I think it's a better use. It's a good use. And then the other thing that people didn't understand is what was the town going to gain from these things? And it was the rental, the lease money from these canopies being placed on town property. And somehow people just couldn't, they figured that we were going to get free electricity or reduced rates electricity. But the town was going to benefit by the lease. People had a hard time understanding that. I mean, I think all these things are in the future. I think that they're gonna happen all around as time goes on. A neighbor of mine just put in a light at the end of her driveway on a lamp pole, and I never did see the electrician dig the line, and the light actually has solar panels on top of the light, and so it comes on at a certain, when it gets dark, the light at the end of the driveway comes on automatically, and then in the morning it shuts off, and then it's recharged by solar. And you can't even see the solar panels on top of that light. They're like integrated into the glass in the light. it's amazing what's happening today. Were we gonna, have you worked out anything? There were some citizens that wanted to speak, or is that gonna happen, or what?
Yeah, I emailed them. I'm waiting to hear back from them.
Okay,
I understand it's gonna be shortly.
okay. I don't know how long people wanna go, a couple hours, good? Is everybody hungry, ready to go for dinner, or what? Okay,
More hours?
huh? A couple more hours.
Oh, you said?
No, I had 12 years of that. Going 3 or 4 hours. I really don't think a meeting should be more than 2 hours long. It all depends on what you're working on and if you're in the middle of something. I guess we could, the number 3 was the removal of non-functioning panels and maintenance of the on-site. Of course, we can't really go into the battery storage yet because we really haven't discussed the battery storage with an expert yet. But, I mean, we do have, it's 3580.34 explains about the maintenance of a solar field, and but it doesn't say anything about replacing non-functioning panels or damaged panels. Maybe we should put something in about that.
Well, and I guess if your business is making electricity,
Yep,
how long are you going to have broken stuff on your site?
right,
It seems like it's in their best interest
yes.
to replace those things.
That may be, but my solar on my roof was out for a year before they came to fix it.
Wow. Because of
That was Tesla.
supply issues, or?
No, this was about 4 years ago.
Okay.
I've heard quite a few stories about that with the residential.
So it does say, the owner or operator shall maintain the facility in good condition.
I think on that one that Sarah's referring to,
Yeah.
which is 3580-41, it goes on to say, including but not be limited to snow removal, painting, structural repairs. I think right after structural repairs, we can just add replacement or repair of non-functioning panels.
Yeah, that's good, Sabri. I like that. Yeah, because it should be obvious, but it's not there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So where you at?
Right after structural
35,
repairs
41.
in 3580.
Yeah, I'm there. I'm just looking for structural.
No, no,
Third
up.
line
Up.
under the.
41's to your left,
41. There you go.
before maintenance of landscaping, right where your
Af-
cursor is.
Yeah. Just shift your
Just
cursor to
before
the
it.
left.
There you go.
Yeah, right there.
Right
Mhm.
there.
All right. You can see why I flunked out of secretarial school.
Repair.
I couldn't
or-
even get a job as Secretary of State. They wouldn't even interview me. So,
Repair, well, it's commas there. Repair or replacement of non-functioning panels.
And how do you enforce that? Because there's
Comment.
that one on Route 44 that's been busted forever. So how do you I think this is great, but
Right.
how does it get enforced?
Well, the thing is
Does
is
the
you,
building commissioner call them and say, you gotta
That's-
fix it, you have
That's a the zoning enforcement officer enforces the zoning.
Right, but without a deadline, like, do we have to give some sort of like, I like what you added, Savory, but how do we make sure it happens?
well, the thing is on that particular panel, every time I go by it, I understand what Tom just told us. I mean, it is up to the company, and that's the way I always felt, to repair their own facility. But then again, on the other hand,
43
well,
says
there's a,
that they have to report.
that's exactly, there's a yearly report on these things too, and they're
Yeah.
supposed to report to the selectmen yearly about the electricity generated and the condition of the solar field.
Right.
So I don't know if that ever happens. I've never seen that on a selectmen's meeting, but I don't watch all of them. But,
Yeah, I think it used to happen. I haven't heard of it lately.
yeah.
Tom, that should say non-functioning panels, I think. Sorry.
But also, you know, I was also thinking, when you look at some of these things, especially that panel off of 44, you wonder if there's, you know, a reason why they haven't repaired it. I mean, you can, if it can't be, you know, you can put all kinds of stuff in the bylaws, but if it can't be enforced, that's tough.
It can be enforced if there's a bond.
Yeah. But the thing is I was also wondering, because when you talk to somebody, I was gonna get this, but COVID came and now we can't get that certain part or whatever. I know there's like auto parts that you can't get, or you have to wait for months, and so I was wondering if it was, you know, something like that was going on there.
And he's out of Pennsylvania, the guy who owns that, so who knows? But again, I don't think that was in there when he put that in, when those panels went in.
Right.
I don't think that was in.
So as always, you know, enforcement is problematic because there's more
Right.
things to enforce than there are people to enforce it. And
Right.
out of, I'm gonna make up a number, 40,000 panels in a bog, who's gonna be able to go, that one,
Yeah.
that 17th one to the left is out, so
Well,
we can plug it in there.
Yeah.
But I
I
think
mean-
it's in the owner's best interest to make sure their
It
stuff
is,
works.
absolutely. Mhm.
right. It just so happens that 1 on 44 sticks out like a sore thumb as you
Yeah.
drive by there all the time. But yeah, you wouldn't go, you don't usually go walking through people's cranberry bogs looking at that.
Yeah, they replaced some of
Solar
them, but not
projects.
all. I don't know if it's because,
Some of his were stolen early on
yeah, that's
as
what I've
well.
heard that they're.
Almost all were.
Yeah, yeah,
But maybe they're, I couldn't understand, but there's always a one-off.
yeah.
Sometimes you gotta drive by it every day and go, what's up with that?
I wonder if I can, let me just throw something out here on what we've just put in there. I'm wondering if we put this in the right place. If we look at 3580-.23, it is an operation and maintenance plan. And it says the project proponent shall submit a plan for the operation and maintenance of the alphabet, which shall include measures for maintaining safe access to the installation, stormwater controls, and then put in repair and replacement of unfunctioning solar panels. Because if you go after that to the annual reporting, they have to certify compliance with
Their operation.
3580-23.
Why don't we just put it in both places?
We can put it in both places, but I would put it in there. That way,
Definitely.
we're already covered with them having to do it by them complying with the operations and maintenance plan that's earlier in the bylaw. So just copy and paste. $35.80.23.
Thank you, sir. I was doing my speed reading, which I'm also not very good at. There's a lot of things I'm not good at. My wife has a list.
Right, I would,
Give me general procedures, operation maintenance. Where are we gonna plug that in at?
I would put it after safe installation, safe access to the installation, and before stormwater controls.
Right there.
Yeah.
Which shall include measures for maintaining safe access and installation, repair or replacement of non-functioning panels, stormwater controls, yada, yada. That's good? What do we like?
Yeah.
Can you go down to the part about the annual reporting to the select board? Because I'm just wondering how that can be better regulated too. I mean, if the select board isn't privy to all of the installations approved, what's a better procedure to make sure the reporting happens? Because, I mean, in my 3 years, I haven't seen anything, so,
And it's not shocking to me.
okay,
that,
so, okay, so write 6 copies of the report shall be submitted to the Board of Selectmen no later than 45 days after, so it's right there, so,
Yep.
so
Right,
then
but-
that is just not being,
Yeah, but who's
Done.
responsible for the report?
the
No.
owner or operator shall submit an annual report. So the select board's office just needs to make sure that those reports are received.
On the list of our draft concerns, number 7 is about that. And it also includes incorporating a consulting engineer's review and a performance bond to ensure compliance. So we've talked about this before. So that, I think, can be added in there as well.
Yeah.
Can you put in the annual reporting something on the idea of failure to comply, would come out of the performance bond?
Well, not out of the performance bond. There's basically non-criminal penalties that you can imply. The building commissioner would do that and say, you're not in compliance with your permit. You have to fix it or you're subject to a non-criminal disposition of $300 per day per event. I have met approximately 0 building commissioners who ever want to send that letter, even though they should have sent one every day in Kingston to Sullivan Brothers.
That's what I mean. If it's not gonna be done, why even have it in there?
Well, I certainly think we can send a happy gram to everybody who gets a tax bill on these things that says, hey,
Yeah,
per 358043, where's your stuff?
yeah. That's a good point.
All right, anything else?
Can I
Okay.
scroll up? Because we talked about herbicides, pesticides a while back, and I plugged something in, let's make sure that folks were fine with that language. So controlling of vegetation. So use of chemical herbicides or pesticides is limited to those approved by the Department of Agricultural's Pesticide Board. Is that what we had talked about a couple weeks ago
Yes,
in November?
but you have an extra "the" in front of the
Pesticide Bureau.
That's because it's
Pesticide Bureau.
really important.
Sorry,
I,
It's capitalized, so it's especially important.
yeah, the, as in those,
So it's Pesticide Bureau, Steve?
those annoying people from Ohio State who go, duh.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
The Ohio
Yeah,
State.
you're in Ohio, man, you got nothing to brag about.
So Tom, it needs to be Pesticide Bureau, according to Steve, not board?
Pesticide Bureau.
Yeah.
I had thrown out the subject to the provisions of mass pesticide regulations.
Mm.
So how should that read then?
I just said, subject to the provisions of the Massachusetts pesticide regulations.
Do you want him to add that to what's there?
I like what's up there.
That doesn't matter.
Are you sure? We could have both.
Even with my typing skills, it's probably less than an hour job to do.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay.
We're good?
Okay.
And for the record, herbicides and pesticides are all pesticides.
Herbicides are pesticides?
So you can, I'd keep that in there, but just for the record, it's all pesticides.
Yeah, because when I look for herbicide board, it threw me to pesticide board
Yeah.
or bureau.
So-
Yeah. Alrighty, so amongst my homework is checking with P-Town, Blue Wave, and UMass Extension. And I will continue on the stuff I've been working on battery storage. I've got a couple of, I've looked at Medway's bylaw, I've looked at Montague's bylaw, because town council had mentioned Montague. As far as those bylaws go in those areas. And I did see, I don't want to, spoil the party for, we talk about battery storage next time, but in Medway, they created a district. And in Montague, they said, you can put these in certain industrial districts. And in both of them, looking at the map, So taking their zoning map and then comparing it to a Google map, both of them are in areas where there's transmission lines in the area. So it may be when we look at those things here, we're talking about certain industrial districts and not all of them, depending on the proximity of where there's power. But that's, next meeting. I don't want people not coming because they know everything's gonna happen at the next meeting.
We're gonna keep it a secret.
Yeah. So I'll, like I said, I've been working on those things, and I'll get emails out to you guys with the stuff that I've got, and you can take a look at them.
And Tom, just to make it really clear, it's not just UMass Extension, it's UMass Clean Energy Extension.
On my homework.
Yes.
Don't want you to go into the wrong place.
Nope.
Well, they are different.
And you will.
I have homework too, to change the language in the waiver.
Thank you. And who are the people who used to sell little plants down in
That's
Wareham?
UMass Extension,
Was that them?
yeah, but it's
No,
not
that was,
UMass Clean Energy Extension.
That was the Natural Resources and
Oh,
Conservation.
that's right, you're right, it was NRCS.
Conservation District, yeah.
It
Yeah.
was NRCS.
Because I love that.
Yeah.
I used to go down there, I got Vinca till my back hurt. Like, plugs the Vinca. Now it's, 20 years later, it's a sheet of Vinca out there. But it was easier for me to bend over and dig holes back in those days. All right,
All right,
anything else?
next meeting,
25th?
is that all right with everybody? 25th at 5:30?
Yes.
I thought we'd get about halfway to three-quarters of the way down the list there, but it didn't happen tonight, but,
It's those abutters. They took up so much time.
Maybe those two are the hard questions and the rest are easy, but.
The 25th?
All right, 25th at 5:30.
5:30.
With that, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, good night, everyone. Thank you.